Welcome to another show, the Research to Reps Roundtable. I'm your co-host, Pat Ivy. With me is Dr. Ted Lambrinidis. Ted, Happy New Year. What's going on?
Happy New Year, Pat. I'm glad to get to go for another year. Some great podcasts that our listeners will benefit from, and I think we're starting the year off with a great podcast.
I couldn't agree more. So let's get right to it. So we have Andrew Stewart, who is the assistant director at the NAPL. He can explain what those letters stand for at the University of Nebraska. Andrew, soon to be Dr. Andrew Stewart. How's it going?
It's going well, guys. Thanks for having me. Longtime listener, big fan, so I'm happy to be able to jump on here with you guys.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ted, I'll take the first one. First of all, I got to say we miss our co-host, Dr. Ernie Reimer. He's at a conference traveling, so I hope everything is going well there. I know this podcast will come out in a few days after, but still want to give him a shout out. Ernie, appreciate everything you do, and Happy New Year, and catch up with you on the next podcast. So I'll start this one off. Andrew, just tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and then maybe take us through what NAPL stands for.
Absolutely. So yeah, my name is Andrew Stewart. So my journey to where I am now is a little bit. People are going to need a little bit of a roadmap. So I'm originally from Oxford, Mississippi. I played college football at Ole Miss. Houston Nutt was my coach. So I finished up with that in 2010. And got into strength conditioning. Spent a year as a middle school history teacher in between internships, and then got into kind of physical therapy, which led me into the military setting, working with the Air Force at Barksdale Air Force Base. From there, I worked with Dr. Kyle Pierce at the Weightlifting High Performance and Development Center there in Shreveport. Which led me to the OTC in Chula Vista before the Rio Games as S&C, and then went to University of New Mexico where I started a Ph.D. And was there for about a little bit over 2 years as a strength conditioning GA Ph.D. student. And then I transitioned from there in 2018 to U.S. speed skating for the 4-year quad going into Beijing. And then after Beijing, I ended up here at Nebraska at the Nebraska Athletics Performance Lab, so NAPL. So we are the sports science and analytics of the Nebraska Athletics Department.
Awesome. That's
good.
Go ahead, Ted.
I was going to say, sometimes you'll be at a conference and somebody that's, say, an undergraduate student will come up to you and go, I'd like to do what you do. And so when somebody says that, give us a little bit of insight on what a normal day looks like, and also a week in terms of, work with the multitude of sports that you have. How's that all organized on a daily and weekly basis?
Sure. Yeah. So here at NAPL, we actually work with just the Olympic sports. So we don't work with football. They have their own sports scientists. We collaborate with that individual. We try to support that individual, obviously. But here, so we're serving all the other sports basically. So we're very fortunate. We have 5 applied sports scientists on staff, all of us which have different kind of backgrounds. So my background being in strength conditioning a little bit more. We have a biomechanist who that's their degree pathway that they went through, athletic trainers, et cetera. So we have, our kind of base levels of services with those teams. And so every team is maybe a little bit different, but our base levels are, we're going to sit down with those individual performance staffs on a quarterly basis. We're going to address, a check-in kind of meeting process where, hey, this is what's going on. These are the questions or the problems that we're wanting to try to answer. Here are the assessments that are probably the best for us to do that. Here, setting up the structure of those assessments, setting up the reporting of those assessments to the individuals, whether that's a strength conditioning coach or athletic trainer. So really that's where it kind of starts. And then from there on the week-to-week basis, like you were saying, or the day-to-day basis, really it comes down to that from those check-in meetings, those processes we establish, those assessment timelines, those kind of things. That gives us probably the best way for us to actually like serve all of these teams. Otherwise, it's just us running from one place to the other, to the other, to the other. And so we established that kind of on that quarterly basis, which then helps kind of fine tune that weekly and daily kind of schedule. All of us, again, we have 5 applied sports scientists. So we do have point people with those teams. Not necessarily like, it's not like S&C, Pat, where it's like, hey, you're with track and field, cross country, soccer, and those are your teams that you're programming for, and those are the only teams. It just means that person's going to field all of those kind of questions and run point basically in communicating. Other people may get pulled in as secondary to a specific question, but that allows us to, from the 5 of us, allows us to kind of attack all of those sports teams across the 7-day kind of period of time. But typically it's depending on what time of year it is, on daily processes, it could be, we're out in the field or at a practice or a weight room session for, 3 to 4 hours with a couple of different teams. And then we're coming back to home base here in the lab and sitting down and kind of talking amongst ourselves, catching up, debriefing a little bit about what's kind of going on, what we've kind of been experiencing. And then from there, it could be, we're sitting down and looking at our long-term plans and long-term kind of strategic planning of what we want to try to accomplish.
So how does the middle school history teacher help you? Because I'm guessing you have to learn how to communicate in a certain way. And I'm not going to put anyone down, but I'm guessing that what you learn how to, as far as communication and working with middle schoolers, you took something away from that, and you may still use it.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to learn kind of I steal this one. I can't remember where it's from, but it was like love language. So what's that person's language, basically, right? Like what's their demeanor, what's their attitude, like learning how to read that person, how to communicate with that person. That was extremely beneficial, learning that, because every kid is going to be so different, right? And you're at a transitionary period in their life in middle school, right? Same thing here in college too, to a degree, right? People are learning how to be adults, and so taking some lessons from how how to interact, how to use my eyes to kind of understand somebody, their body language, things like that, and learn how to communicate with them. And also a great addition to that was my time at speed skating, because the competitive age of a speed skater is 13. That's when they can start competing like junior and senior kind of level, right? So I had 13-year-olds and I had 36-year-olds. So I had a wide variety of age ranges at speed skating. So I've had a lot of experience with this kind of age population in college, and so using definitely my speed skating time and my middle school and my secondary education, bachelor's degree, it's kind of paid off.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
I got a question with regard to, we sit there as sports scientists. We're always trying to look at, some of the long-term planning to make sure that's optimized. But in today's age of the transfer portal, you're getting such a turnover of the rosters. How's that been hard to manage on your end?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Ted. We've been pretty fortunate. I've been here for almost 2 years. Been pretty fortunate that we haven't had like a mass exodus or entry into the departments and to the teams. But that is something that we do have to kind of look at and maybe even modify some things. But really for us, it's we try to be the stewards of the athlete's data, right? And so if we do have an athlete who does leave the university, we want to make sure that we are compliant with all of the legal rules and things like that, and go through the proper channels for that. But for us, it's mainly been, we haven't had any like brand new incoming freshman type of individuals who may need a bigger, physical preparation. We've had some like fifth year seniors and grad transfers. By that point, they're coming in, later in their career. They may have only 1 year, and so really, it's for us, it's been kind of a learning process right now of trying to establish what that looks like. And I mean, I would go back to you too, Ted, and your experience with the different teams that you've been around and things like that at that higher level. Like I try to look at reaching out to people like Dr. Patrick Ward, and like how do you guys handle that? Because with NIL, it may end up getting to that situation, right? Where we're going to have transfers in and out. It's almost going to be like an NFL type of situation where, how do you deal with someone who's a new player to the team, and how do you get that? How do you go about identifying their deficiencies and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think you want to look at, and it gets, well, the CBA helps that because technically the athlete will also own his data. So we can say, we need to see, can we get some of your, GPS, practice data. So, we're not, especially if it's mid-season. So we're not, underworking or overworking yet. Let's see where your workloads were. Obviously, I think the medical history goes with them, and as they say, just as in crime, football, sports injuries tend to be repeat offenders. So let's try to see what this person's rap sheet looks like injury wise. And sometimes, you go, well, is the juice worth the squeeze? Personnel comes in and says, what about this player? I go, boy, they're very talented, but they're going to get injured. So figure out, well, if we could get 8 games out of them for this season, then we'll be all right with that. So now with regard to your level, how does your university view if an athlete leaves? Can their data go with them?
So we are actually pretty fortunate. We are kind of tied to athletics is kind of tied to academics in a pretty good way here. We do have an IRB that is also attached to us. We do have a consent form that the athletes sign with their data. So that data goes into a data repository. You do have to go through a pretty extensive kind of process to get that information. And it's a lengthy process. And so that, again, kind of secures that athlete's data. And that's really one of our big things is, again, we want to be the stewards of the student athletes. We want to do what's right for the student athlete. So we want to make sure that if we're asking them to do these things, that we're taking that information very, very, that sensitive information, very, very, it's very, very important to us. So we want to make sure that like that data is just not accessible to whoever, whenever, however. So we do have a process of going through and getting that information. So say a student athlete, hypothetical situation, say a student athlete is leaving, or they want to use a medical individual, PT, AT, what have you, outside of the university. Say they're a fifth year senior and they got injured in their last year and they want to go outside of that. If they want to have that data, they have to go through formal requests. We have to vet that request. We have to, go through that pretty lengthy process, but we will help that student athlete. Now, again, this is just at Nebraska. It's not at, all the other universities. So you start throwing in, hey, this person transfers over to this one. We may have this process set up, but the other university may not. So then we're trying to in-house make sure that we're okay. But it's not a cookie cutter situation. It's not like a CBA situation where all leagues are set up the same way. And I don't know. I mean, Pat, with your time in college, do you see that kind of transitioning now with NIL? Do you see that like, because it's been a while since I've been in college, right? I've been in the Olympic setting, coming back to college now, and kind of coming into the NIL space. and into this situation. So I don't know. Do you see that kind of down the road?
I think it's coming, because you're going to have agents. Well, you may already have agents to some respect. You're going to have athletes that they have their NIL relationships. What all do they need to bring with them or take with them? I think they're going to be figuring that out. I don't think, for the most part, they really understand intellectual property and data and what they have maybe agreed to or signed off on, but it's coming. It's that those conversations will be happening if they're not already happening. I know before there was the transfer portal, we would want to have an idea of what that athlete had experienced. And so you would know typically what style of training they had at their previous institution, because a lot of us knew each other in the sport of football.
Yeah.
Now it gets it's different when you start getting into the Olympic sports, and you may not know all of the athletic performance coaches working with all of the, many teams. So eventually an athlete really wants a fresh start. They want you to see the positives that they're bringing to the new school. So I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I've talked to professional strength coaches in the NFL and even NBA. What do you do? And they say they always sit down and interview that athlete and ask them, okay, tell us about the type of training that you've been exposed to. So maybe it's going to be a little bit more, qualitative, or just maybe more subjective than it is objective. That's what I see right now, but where does it go? When an athlete knows that they're wearing this monitor and it's collecting how fast they're running up and down the field, when do they realize what they can do with that information? And then what is our jobs to make sure we're doing it the right way? I think you all might be on the cutting edge out front on that, compared to a lot of other people. When you say you have 5 sports scientists, I don't know who else has 5. So what I do want to ask you is your experience in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare when it comes to data? Because I know they're very strict when it comes to what you can share and how you're collecting information. What's the difference between working, with the Air Force and then college?
Yeah, Air Force, you're exactly right. Everything is highly secure. And so, yeah, it's as a contract civilian in that situation, we had, things that we could and things that we couldn't be a part of. We had things where, my background, I was, helping with the physical preparation and things like that. I would go and speak with aerospace physiology, which was really cool. To be honest, like that's, they would basically do altitude training and getting them prepared for flights and things like that. And that was really cool to be able to experience that and help with. But there were things within there that I couldn't have access to, right? Couldn't be there for some testing, could be there for others. But yeah, it's about the big overarching thing that kind of goes with both college, the way college is going now with sports science, is again, it goes back to data security, data hygiene, data quality, ensuring those things, so that when we're making decisions, right, they're appropriate decisions, right? We know that we're basing this off of information that's true, right? And so that's kind of the same thing here in college. What I kind of see is like technology has boomed, right? Everybody's keeping up with the Joneses. Everybody wants to do, we've got force plate. I think you guys were talking a couple of podcasts ago with Tommy down at Miami. Like everybody wants to do jumps, everybody wants to do all these things, and that's great, but we need to actually make sure that we're following a specific protocol, that we're collecting in a specific way, that we're looking at the quality of that data, why we're collecting that data. Does that, is it answering a question, or are we just collecting it to just collect it? All of those things kind of come from my experience with the military as well, right? Because our time with those individuals is very, very short if we think of it. They're constantly coming in and out.
Yep.
They're constantly, there's, when I was there in 2014, there was deployments constantly. There was missions, exercises, things like that. So if we're asking them to do something and we're providing them something in return, we need to make sure that those things are checked off, right? And so, yeah, I mean, again, like Ted, you've been in this for a while too. Have you seen, kind of that as well? Like, have you seen, the people basing their decisions, like, are they basing it off of questions? Or are they just basing it off of the technology they have? Like, have you kind of seen that kind of similar?
Yeah, I would say that the better organizations use all those as for decision making. But I to your point, I think there's much more data that's collected than is ever analyzed, and that's problem. I think that's a problem.
Yeah.
So are we wasting time? So I think those are some questions that, hopefully there'll be better answers for in the near future. But from the feedback you get from the individual athletes,
mm-hmm.
that they say, what are we doing this for?
Mm-hmm.
What's the most common question sometimes? Because you know how it is. You'll have, sometimes they're just like sheep following each other, but occasionally you get the athletes, all right, tell me why we're doing this.
Yeah, that's a great point. At speed skating, when I first got to speed skating, they in the previous Olympic cycle, they had 8 things that they were collecting, whether that was on a daily basis or a weekly basis, or whatever the schedule was. And this was before I got there, and they took that 8 and they cut it in half, because the buy-in was not there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I got there in 2018, we had those 4 things, and really those 4 things we ended up cutting down to maybe 1 or 2, to be honest, because it was that situation where people were, wellness, right, or session RPE, right? Hey, tell us how hard it was, how long was it, and what was the category of the exercise, right, or the training. And so we would collect that information, but what we started to notice was, we used the AMS for it. And what I started to notice, at least, and communicated to our high performance director, which is no one was filling it out on this specific team. And a handful of other people were doing it on a few other national teams. But basically what it came down to was the response that I got was, why am I going to do it? Because nothing ever changes. The training stays the same. I could feel completely garbage and nothing's going to change. And the 100% truth. And I said, I completely see your point. I 100% see your point. And I went straight to the head coach of that national team and went to the high performance director, and I said, let's just stop doing it. We're not changing anything. We're not modifying anything. We're not using the information how you're supposed to use it. And the athletes aren't bought in, and the athletes aren't responding. So let's just cut it. And instead of doing that, we just use force plate jumps twice a week in place of it, to get an idea of how they were responding to training, and using that information, or at least I was using that information and communicating that information to the athletic trainers and to the coaching staff, and modifying the training programs within the weight room sessions. And so it's just, to your point, it's like we're collecting just to collect right now. There's no buy-in to this situation. The athlete raises a really great point and a really good question. And let's just scrap it and move on to something that they are invested in.
So with coaches, some have different levels of buy-in. The ones that are bought in, that's easy. Have a conversation with them and get them what they need. The ones that you're collecting information on their team and the information you have, or you believe it can help the team. If the coach has an understanding and buys in and then makes some changes, which will make your job even more, I guess you'll be the value that you bring then gets realized. So with those coaches, not that you have any currently, but if you did, based on your experiences and conversations with other sports scientists, what are some strategies you have, and where do you think we are with it all, as far as coaches needing to buy in or just utilizing the resources and the science?
Yeah, I think that's great. You hit on something that's really been so I sit on the special interest group with sports science for the NSCA, and at one of the national conferences, and that was kind of a conversation piece, which was, how do I get a coach to buy in? And really, it's what I'm noticing, and I'd be interested to see kind of like Ted's thoughts on this too, is the soft skills of sports science have kind of been lost to a degree, because everything's been really on the hard skills with just like, oh, we're doing this analysis, we're using this AMS, we're using this technology, we're doing this protocol, but the soft skills of it and have kind of been lost. Where I talk to a coach and I tell him, hey, this is just to complement what you see. You've got X number of years being the head coach of this specific sport. I was not coordinated enough to play this sport, right? Like I was not. I used to joke at speed skating, where I grew up in Mississippi, we didn't have ice. Ice was only in our drinks, right? Like I'm not a speed skater, right? Here, like I'm not a basketball player, definitely not a track athlete. Like I'm not a golfer. I never have been. So you have a skill set, right? So all this is to complement your skill set. You know what your team needs. You know what you need to do to get them prepared, right? This is just here to kind of complement that. And so I'll tell coaches here, like, hey, do what you need to do, get in what you need to get in. And then we'll manage, like you can manage on the back end, right? And so it's not overbearing them with it. It's not saying, hey, if hey, our acute chronic ratio was this, we're predicting that this person's going to have an ACL. It's none of that kind of stuff. It's very much just a conversation, communication with them, understanding that, hey, you're a piece to this puzzle kind of thing. And just kind of communicating to them, like, this is a resource for you. I'm going to send this over to you. If it's interesting to you, we can have more discussion with it, but it's just there to kind of facilitate conversation and collaboration. And it's just there to kind of, complement you as a coach. I don't know, Ted, like with, you've had more experience in this than I have. Like, I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that too, of like, have you kind of in conversation with some of the newer kind of sports scientists, like, do you see that kind of development of the soft skills kind of like underdeveloped compared to the hard skills?
Oh, I think what you just said was well said. I don't think the soft skills are developed in enough people. For instance, you're going to tell your volleyball coach that you're going to, who's been successful. I always tell coaches to sort of what you just said. Hey, you were successful before I provided any input. You'll be successful after I provide any input. So I think, as you said, just being a piece of the puzzle, I think you'll find you get more buy-in from the head coaches that way, and less resistance. But those people skills are crucial. That's how you can collaborate. And
Yeah.
do you find you get more feedback or interaction with your winning coaches or your losing coaches?
Oh, that's a good question. That's a really, really good question. I would say it's kind of mixed. I think it's kind of 50-50. I think, when a program's not doing as well as it wants to, then everyone's starting to kind of look deeper into things. And then when you have someone doing really, really well, they start to look into things like, how can we get that 1% better? So I think it's kind of 50-50. And so, yeah, that's actually a very interesting question. I've never actually, I don't know, Pat, with your experience in the years that you've had, like, have you seen that where, you know, uh, you maybe someone has a losing season, and it's like, all right, we got to scrap everything and restart over. And then someone's got the winning season where they're like, you know, Kobe Bryant, mama mentality, yeah, just like, hey, let's leave nothing unturned.
I think yes, and I've seen coaches scrap everything in the middle of a season uh, because they weren't having the success they wanted to have. So I've seen it all. I think what makes it more enjoyable for support staff, those that are providing resources, is to have a coach with a growth mindset. One that believes in what they're doing. They have a good foundation, good philosophy. They have standards. They know what they want to do. They communicate well. Yet they are still looking for that edge. And I think those are the most enjoyable coaches to work for. I think those are some of the more successful coaches. Even and I've worked with a couple of those, and those that are. I'm watching these football championship games and just paying attention to the coaches and who's there and what their philosophies are and how they like to implement what. If you can adapt to the transfer portal in NIL, you're going to have a tough time. Like, I know we have data here and we have science and we're collecting force plate data, but if you cannot dominate the transfer portal, and if you cannot have a NIL friendly perception of a program, you're going to have trouble. So there's a lot on these coaches' plates now. There's a lot to manage. I've heard a coach say they have to now recruit their current rosters to keep them.
Yeah,
So
very, very different from when either you or I played college football.
it's more like Ted, and it's becoming more and more like professional sports, except there's the governing body or the any sort of collective bargaining agreement, anything like that doesn't exist. It's like the wild, wild west. And I think it's interesting for you know, we're talking about research to reps. So how are we going to, what information is out there that we can find, we can locate, that can help with the practical application and help a coach win? Because ultimately that's what it's about. If we somehow they're finding ways to get for athletes to be able to transfer to not just one school, but two schools. I saw an athlete who was in one uniform earlier this year, and then this past week, they're in a different uniform. Like, that is
Yeah.
professionalism to some extent. Ted, what do you think? I mean, as you're watching it.
Oh yeah, it's you have to be able to adapt. You're almost like a minor league baseball manager. Well, hey, this person just got called up, or this person left, and like you say, if you can't embrace that, you're going to have problems. But when you say we got to recruit our roster each day, to me, that is, you've got to have a really good relationship with your players. And there's a couple times where I've gone into teams and I'll go to their training table. There's the coaches in one corner of the room, and then there's the players. And I go, you got a problem. those coaches, here's a time they can interact. You're a lot of times players, their guard gets down when you're eating, you're discussing, asking them about themselves over breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And that's how you recruit a kid every day. Just establish relationships with them and actually show that you care. And here you have these coaches all sitting there bullshitting by themselves, and the players are over there. And, you might have found out that kid's grandma just died over lunch. So, once the kids know that you establish those relationships, that's recruiting your roster each day. And I think that I don't see that enough when I go on visits.
So, Andrew, how can a sports scientist, because if you identify the problems or the challenges, I should say, the challenges that we have in collegiate athletics, for maybe the past, prior to the last year or two, the previous 5 years, it has definitely been about technology, gathering data, and then figuring out a way to produce a report that is understandable and appreciated by head coaches. Coaches really wanted that information, like, hey, tell me how we're doing. I want to know how my players are recovering, and are we getting better? Are we getting faster? Are we getting more explosive? I don't know if that is the same concern today as it was 5 years ago. So the challenges that we have, so we say sports science here is the study of sport. So if you're studying what's happening in sport, how can a sport scientist help a coach today with the challenges they're facing?
Yeah, I think it's almost, and this is something that I kind of you mentioned earlier, almost Ph.D. or almost doctor, like something in my Ph.D. is talent identification, talent development, talent retention, right? And so I think taking that kind of professional idea there, right, where we want to identify talent, coaches identify the talent, they bring them in, they recruit them, they get them on campus, right? Talent development, we want to make sure that their physical development, their technical tactical development is being taken care of. And talent retention, and some of that, like Ted talked about, the soft skills, the communication, the building relationships, things like that, all of those different things. And so really, I think that's where, for me, kind of sports science can kind of come in, right? So we can help with talent identification, right? We can help with that information, whether that's transfer portal or not, right? Whether that's a kid coming out of high school, we can kind of help with that situation and get brought into that situation from the coaching staff, right? We can run analytics in that situation, if it's appropriate. And then we bring them in talent development, right? And so really, like, development, again, physical performance development, right? At S&C, we can look at injury mitigation as well in that. And then the other piece is that most people don't really think about is being able to be brought into the technical tactical side. So we're pretty fortunate. We have a fully we have Colossus motion capture biomechanics lab here with Vertec force plates underneath the flooring. We have a basketball kind of setup here as well, goal, hard court surface. And so we actually, bring up men's and women's basketball. We'll actually look at, we'll sit down with the coaches and say, hey, like, where's this person has high hopes of going into the NBA or WNBA, right? Where do they sit? And again, this is where the analytics part can come in. Where do they sit with amongst their peers right now, right? Where do they grade out? And what are the things that they need to really work on from the X's and O's, technical tactical side? And how can we help with that? So looking at their shooting mechanics, looking at shot location, makes, misses, things like that, and really sitting down with the coaches and identifying maybe at these different levels of progression, like, where are they kind of lacking, and really to get into a actual player development kind of process there. And then being able to actually monitor that within practices and individual sessions throughout the summer, where we have the most amount of time with them, right, for basketball. And so the last piece of that, is going to be retention, and so that's again to Ted's point that he brought up earlier, is really looking into that. So I think that's where we kind of start to shift a little bit from the previous 5 years being all about data driven, like, oh, we're going to collect data on all these things, we're going to figure out all these really general physical preparation metrics. We're going to really push hard with maybe it's practice loading and things like that. We're going to push really hard with those things, acute chronic ratios, all that kind of stuff. And we're going to push really hard with that. And now really it gets to the point where it's like, you know what, really it's talent identification, development, and retention. Because to the point that we're seeing, this is starting to shift towards professional a little bit. The kids are starting to pick up on that, right? They're starting to look at themselves as professional with NILs and things like that. So they're going to want to know, at least to a degree, how their brand or how their image or all that, how is that going to be improved? And so if we have those pillars set up, I think we can kind of accomplish that. But I don't know, Ted, I mean, again, you've had experience in the professional setting. Do you see organizations at the professional level where there is a CBA and things like that? Do you see them kind of in those kind of pillars too? Like, we want to identify the talent, we want to make sure that they're developed, and we want to be able to retain them, however that is.
Yeah, I think if you look at, I was just at the MLB winter meetings a month ago, and there's a sport where you see a lot more technology going into talent identification. Mm-hmm. So you're merging, a lot of data collection, because there's a couple organizations that essentially do not have traditional full-time scouts. They just have data scientists, and they, sort of figure out, what metrics they think are going to be the most important that will translate to the, MLB prospects. And they go that route. And I think with the data that's collected in baseball, ironically, that's not monetized by the players. It's owned by MLB. And I don't know how that CBA came about with that. But if you get on Baseball Savant and you look at all the metrics that are captured, it's amazing. You can go down so many rabbit holes, but I think that's sort of really objective metrics that, I think sometimes players can buy into in terms of working with a sports scientist, going over some of their movement analysis and so forth. That I think it's different. I think baseball has so much data available. It's a little different than a lot of other sports. Have you found that with your baseball program there at Nebraska?
Yeah, we'll actually, we're pretty fortunate. We have Brad Smith, who was a baseball coach here. He left here, went to the Yankees for 4 years in player development, and now he's come back. He's actually the one that kind of oversees the analytics side of things and statistics and things like that. He's getting his Ph.D. in statistics here at the university. And so that is something he does bring in, that depth of knowledge from Major League Baseball to kind of help with that, because there are a ton of things. And when you sit down really with any coach, it's whether it's baseball or football or basketball or whatever it is, they're going to throw out 20 different things that they say they look at. So it's really like, all right, can we whittle this down? Right. And so, yeah, to your point with baseball in particular, like, yes, there are a lot of metrics and a lot of things we can look at. Yes, we do bring them in at least twice through the fall for a biomechanical analysis for pitchers and for the hitters. But really, like, to your point, we try to sit down, and Brad is great about this, is being able to sit down and say, you're looking at these 5 things. We really need to look at these 2 things. And these 2 things are going to be the most important things for us to track over this fall ball period, in conjunction with the biomechanics.
Yeah, it's interesting too, is with a lot of the movement analysis you can do on pitchers, and then I've also seen like a elite pitching coach can sit there and watch and give you much more detailed insights and corrections than if I use movement analysis. on a player just because they have a trained eye. And I find the two are probably going to be the best for an organization.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, again, it goes back to, these are people, I always kind of side on the side of the fence where it's like these are people, and it goes back to speed skating. You've literally been in this sport for as long as I've been alive. You've been coaching or competing in the sport for however long I've been alive. Yes, I can look through all the literature and look through all of this, and I can talk to you about all these kind of things, but you could literally sit there and watch somebody for maybe 2 laps and tell me what their fault is without me ever having to open my mouth. And so there is some humility there where it's sometimes you just need to be quiet and just, hey, I'll provide you this, but you know what you need to do. You can use that information. Again, to what I said earlier, right? You have years of experience with this. It's just here to complement. Maybe it confirms your biases. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe that leads us into another conversation.
Andrew, we might have some people in common. So I want to mention a couple of names and put you on the spot really quick. I'll start with I'm guessing Akeem Robinson.
Yes.
From New Mexico.
Yep.
And Derek Leger.
I don't think I know Derek personally. I think we may have been passing.
Yeah. I know you all were out there in New Mexico at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, he was out there. I think he came in towards the end of my time. We also had our head football guy at the time was Armand Satchel, who is over.
Okay.
I think he's over at Arkansas now, but he was over there with you guys at Louisville.
Yeah. So it's amazing. Just how we are connected. Talk about for someone that wants to, like Ted asked this question earlier, that may want to be in your position. Talk about all of those. Talk about networking, the importance of it, and along with education. Do you think one's more important than the other?
Yeah, I think, for me, it's going to be, you need to have a foundation. I think anyone that's going to work in this kind of setting, sports science, you need to have some sort of foundation within athletics, whether that's, S&C, nutrition, athletic training, whatever it is, because you need to understand the environment. You need to cut your teeth a little bit, and work those hours and build that, those soft skills up. And then I think the other thing is that also gives you a foundational information and education. But then the next piece to that, to your point, is going to be networking, knowing individuals, reaching out and talking to individuals. I mean, I got I won't say I got this job, but I did talk to Chris Bach, who was the previous director here, before this position actually opened up. And guys that I had worked with, Sam Gardner, who's at the USOPC with Paralympics, he knew our current director, Matt. And just having conversations, reaching out to people like Patrick Ford, and trying to build that network does help. From both the job perspective, but also your knowledge perspective. And then, lastly, education does, there is going to come a time where you're going to see, the minimum qualifications for a sports science position is going to start being PhD. You're going to start to see that. Not necessarily that, there aren't great sports scientists that are not PhD, but you're going to start to see that kind of start to emerge, the education piece. Pat, again, transitioning, your time through S&C, and I came up when you guys were doing amazing things out there at Missouri, and I actually, I'll plug this. I actually bought your football book back in the day. It's still sitting up on my desk over there, but but yeah, I mean, I like, again, your transition through that field, coming in and then, you going and pursuing your higher education and things like that. I mean, I mean, I kind of see that reflecting in the sports science side now too.
Yeah. Well, one, I got to go backwards and say I made a mistake on the crossover because I was thinking New Mexico State.
Ah, with Don
And
Decker. Yeah, no.
yeah. So that's my fault. But to answer your question, I think younger professionals think I have to go on a certain track to get to this place, thinking it's linear, and it's not. Some of us are it's an S, some is zigzagging, sometimes it's forward, backwards, sometimes it's up and down. Uh, Everyone's path is going to be different. But there are a few things that I think are very important, and that's understanding networking, understanding integrity, like how you work and who you are and your character does matter. Um, where you work and maybe even what you're doing is not as important as how you do it. And learning the best ways to collaborate with people, finding the best ways to communicate. Like those things are no one's path is the same. Ted's path is different. My path, your path. Um, I talked to several of the assistants from back in the day at Missouri. Like everyone's path is so different. But the one thing I think we were trying to do is be prepared for what could be next. Not saying, oh, this is going to be next, but what could be next? And how do you prepare for that? How do you network and build the relationships and build up your resume, your knowledge base, so that you're prepared for what could be next? And I think if we can pass that message along to younger professionals, it'll help them out, maybe not get so frustrated or feel like they're out there by themselves on an island. It's just we've all had different paths. We've all had different roadblocks, different resistance. I'm sure Ted can tell you lots of stories about challenges he's had, and he didn't just get to be in the position he's in. Like, oh, it was easy. No, I'm sure he can tell us some stories about the how hard it was, and just as you can, I can as well. Those are things that are important to be able to go through those experiences so that you know what a good situation is, and, and you can appreciate a good situation. So, did that answer your question at all?
Yeah, it did. Absolutely.
Yeah. What do you think, Ted?
Oh, I think it's been a great podcast. This hour's flown by, but we got two more questions for Andrew. First one's a real quick one. Growing up in Mississippi, I were all your neighbors from the north because you really don't have a Mississippi accent. And
That's great. That's great.
but the second question is, sharing some reading, books that you think, and it doesn't have to be on the topic of sports science, that you think might be valuable for our listeners.
Yeah, so the first part of that, the Mississippi accent I haven't lived in Mississippi since 2000 and probably 2012, 2011. So yeah, it's kind of fallen off by the wayside. But my wife and her family joke that I'm from the north because I'm from North Mississippi.
Okay.
And my wife grew up in a very small town called Brookhaven, Mississippi. And so they have a very thick Southern accent, whereas I don't really have that. So yes, I'm from the North, apparently. Books right now, yeah, the one I'm gonna go blank on it right now unless I have it. Um, there are a few different books that I have, kind of some of the more cliche ones like the Culture Code and things like that. I think the thing that I had a really good friend of mine named Chris Moore, He was part of a podcast called Barbell Shrugged years ago. Passed away just after I left Chula Vista in 2016. And so Chris was always really big on looking at books for developing yourself. And so really like that, those are kind of the books, getting into those things, not so much, again, not the cliche ones of like, oh, you need to build these habits and things like that, but really the ones that make you kind of think about, think about your actions, think about who you are, think about what you want your legacy to be, think about how you want to impact yourself, your life, the life of others, and things like that. And that was really Chris's big thing. Was, he was a former powerlifter, trained with Louis at Westside. He was a master's student of Andy Fry's at University of Memphis. He was really, really intelligent guy, really into strength conditioning. And his big thing was later on in his life, when he kind of got out of that phase and transitioned into being a father and things of that nature, it really shifted towards having impact, and not only in meaning and purpose and driving yourself forward. And so those are kind of the books that I would kind of lean towards, because I have two small children. I have a 6-year-old and I have a 9-month-old daughter. And, I always in the back of my head go, hey, how do I, this is my legacy. These are my children. Right. And so it's, how can I be the father that I didn't have, not necessarily my father was a bad person, but how can I be a really good father? How can I be a really good husband? How can I be a really good servant to the athletes that I have here and the people that I work with? And that's kind of, those are the kind of books and genres that I kind of look through.
Well, that's awesome. Appreciate it. It definitely comes across. You're an outstanding person and outstanding character. Definitely look forward to getting to know you even better in the future. Is there anything you want to leave our viewers and listeners with as we close out?
Yeah, I mean, if anybody's interested in what we do here at Nebraska and the Nebraska Athletic Performance Lab and applied sports science, I can provide my email address to you, Pat. We do have internships throughout the different kind of semesters and things like that. The summertime is usually our big time where we get a lot of people. But again, to our point earlier, we work with all the Olympic sports, and so we do provide an internship curriculum. We do provide hands-on experience. We do provide an education piece, and our big thing is developing the future of sports science. We're not really interested in purchasing a bunch of new tech and things like that. We're really about trying to build up that profession, right? And so getting people who are interested, getting them into it early into their career, whether they're undergraduates or master's degree students, so that they can then use that information and that experience to hopefully land an entry-level position and keep developing themselves and the profession.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. Take care and have a good day.
You too. Thanks, guys.
Take care. Great job.